In the small, quiet town of Willow Creek, life moved at a slow and predictable pace. Nestled between rolling green hills and surrounded by dense forests that whispered secrets in the wind, the town seemed like a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. The people were friendly, the streets calm, and the days blended into one another without much excitement. But beneath this peaceful surface lay stories of the past, forgotten by most, but not by everyone. Arthur Langley was one of those rare individuals who couldn't let go of the past. He wasn't just curious, he was obsessed. A historian by passion, Arthur spent his days buried in old books, yellowed newspapers, and dusty archives. His tiny house on Maple Street was cluttered, with maps, photographs, and artifacts from decades gone by. To some it might have looked messy, even chaotic, but to Arthur, every item told a story, a fragment of history waiting to be pieced together. What made Arthur stand out wasn't just his love for history, it was his unshakable belief that the truth always mattered. While others shrugged off local legends as mere superstition, Arthur saw them as clues to something deeper. And there was no legend more intriguing or unsettling than the tale of Dead Man's Hill. Dead Man's Hill was an eerie spot located on the outskirts of Willow Creek. It was home to an abandoned cemetery, long overtaken by weeds and time. Most townsfolk avoided it, claiming it brought bad luck. Some said you could hear whispers if you stood too close to the graves, while others swore they'd seen shadows moving among the tombstones at night. These stories weren't taken lightly. Parents warned their children to stay away, and even teenagers dared each other to visit only during the daytime. But Arthur didn't believe in curses or ghosts. To him, Dead Man's Hill was a puzzle waiting to be solved. One particular grave caught his attention. A weathered headstone marked simply with the initials E.W. No dates, no epitaphs, just those two letters carved into stone. Who was E.W.? Why had they been buried alone, far from the rest of the cemetery? And why did so many people seem afraid to talk about it? For months, Arthur tried to uncover answers through research. He scoured church records, combed through old newspaper clippings, and interviewed elderly residents who still remembered bits and pieces of Willow Creek's history. Yet every lead ended in frustration. It was as though someone, or something, had deliberately erased all traces of E.W.'s existence. The more obstacles he encountered, the more determined Arthur became. If written records wouldn't give him answers, then maybe the grave itself would. The idea of digging up a 100-year-old grave wasn't something Arthur took lightly. He wrestled with doubts and fears, wondering if he was crossing a line he shouldn't. What if he disturbed something sacred? What if the stories about curses held a kernel of truth? Still, his curiosity outweighed his hesitation. He convinced himself that whatever lay beneath the ground might hold the key to understanding not just E.W.'s story, but perhaps the entire town's forgotten past. On the night he decided to act, the atmosphere felt different. The sky was overcast, and the air carried a strange stillness as if nature itself was holding its breath. Armed with a flashlight, a sturdy shovel, and a notebook to jot down observations, Arthur set out for Dead Man's Hill. Each step toward the cemetery felt heavier than the last, weighed down by anticipation and nerves. When he finally reached the crumbling headstone, he paused, shining his light over the faded engraving. E.W. Taking a deep breath, Arthur began to dig. The soil was damp and cold, clinging to his gloves as he worked. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as he shoveled, his muscles aching with each movement. Just when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, his shovel hit something hard. Heart racing, he dropped to his knees and brushed away the dirt with trembling hands. Beneath the surface lay the edge of a wooden coffin, its lid cracked and splintered with age. Arthur hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to proceed. Then, steeling himself, he pried open the coffin. Inside, instead of skeletal remains, he found something unexpected, a leather-bound journal wrapped carefully in silk cloth. Its presence sent a shiver down his spine. Carefully unwrapping it, he opened the journal to reveal pages filled with elegant handwriting. Though the ink had faded slightly, the words were legible enough to read. Flipping through the entries, Arthur realized he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. This wasn't just any journal. It belonged to Eleanor Whitmore, a woman whose name had vanished from historical records after her mysterious disappearance in 1923. Her writings hinted at dark truths about Willow Creek, truths that had been buried along with her. As Arthur sat there in the dim glow of his flashlight, surrounded by silence and shadows, he knew his life and the town's future would never be the same again. The night was eerily quiet as Arthur Langley stood at the edge of Deadman's Hill, staring down at the weathered headstone marked with the initials E.W. His breath came in short, nervous puffs, visible in the cold autumn air. The flashlight in his hand cast long shadows across the uneven ground, making the cemetery feel alive with movement. Every rustle of leaves or distant hoot of an owl sent a jolt through him, but he pushed aside his fears. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. Digging up a grave wasn't something Arthur took lightly. It wasn't just illegal. It felt wrong on so many levels. But desperation had driven him here. For weeks, he had searched tirelessly for clues about Eleanor Whitmore, whose name had disappeared from history books without explanation. The more he dug into the past, the more questions arose. Why had no one spoken of her? Why did the townsfolk react with such unease whenever he mentioned Dead Man's Hill? And what secrets lay beneath the soil that everyone seemed so determined to keep hidden? As he tightened his grip on the shovel, Arthur reminded himself why he was doing this. History mattered. Truth mattered. If Eleanor's story had been erased, then it was his duty to uncover it, not just for her sake, but for the sake of Willow Creek itself. With renewed determination, he plunged the blade of the shovel into the earth and began to dig. The work was grueling. The ground was damp and heavy, clinging stubbornly to the metal edges of the tool. Each thrust required effort, and after only a few minutes, sweat trickled down Arthur's forehead despite the chilly night. His muscles burned and his back ached, but he refused to stop. Time lost all meaning as he focused solely on the rhythm of digging, shove, lift, toss, over and over again until finally, the sound changed. Instead of soft dirt, the shovel struck something solid. A hollow thud echoed faintly in the stillness. Arthur froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knelt down and brushed away the loose soil with his hands, revealing the edge of a wooden box. The coffin was old, its surface cracked and splintered with age. A layer of dust coated the wood, giving it an almost ghostly appearance under the beam of his flashlight. For a moment, Arthur hesitated. What if he was wrong? What if this wasn't Eleanor's grave? Or worse, what if opening it unleashed something he couldn't handle? Shaking off his doubts, Arthur reminded himself that fear wouldn't get him answers. Carefully, he wedged the tip of the shovel beneath the lid and pried it open. The hinges groaned in protest, releasing a musty smell that made him wrinkle his nose. Inside, instead of skeletal remains, he found something unexpected. A leather-bound journal wrapped in silk cloth. Its presence sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't ordinary burial practice. Someone had gone to great lengths to preserve this book. With trembling hands, Arthur lifted the journal from the coffin and unwrapped the delicate fabric protecting it. The leather cover was worn but intact, embossed with intricate patterns that hinted at craftsmanship from another era. Flipping it open, he saw pages filled with elegant handwriting. Though the ink had faded slightly over time, the words were still legible. Arthur squinted, reading the first few lines. March 14, 1923. I write these words knowing full well they may never see the light of day. If you have found this journal, then my worst fears have come true. I am either dead or silenced forever. The truth I hold is dangerous, and those who seek to bury it will stop at nothing to ensure it remains hidden. Arthur's pulse quickened. He flipped through the pages, skimming entries that spoke of corruption, betrayal, and power struggles within Willow Creek. Names appeared repeatedly, names of families who still held influence in the town today. Eleanor detailed how certain individuals manipulated land deals, silenced dissenters, and maintained their grip on power through coercion and deceit. Her final entry ended with a chilling warning. If this journal is discovered, beware. They are still watching. A chill ran down Arthur's spine. This wasn't just a personal account. It was evidence of a conspiracy spanning generations. As he sat there amidst the graves, surrounded by darkness and silence, he realized the magnitude of what he had uncovered. This wasn't just about Eleanor Whitmore anymore. It was about exposing the truth behind Willow Creek's shadowy past. But as the initial excitement wore off, reality set in. Arthur glanced around nervously, suddenly aware of how isolated he was. The forest loomed behind him, its trees swaying gently in the breeze. Shadows danced across the ground, playing tricks on his mind. Was someone, or something, watching him? He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. Paranoia wouldn't help him now. Carefully, Arthur rewrapped the journal and tucked it into his bag. He covered the coffin back up, patting the soil firmly to erase any sign of disturbance. Then, flashlight in hand, he hurried down Dead Man's Hill, eager to leave the eerie cemetery behind. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made him glance over his shoulder, though he saw nothing but darkness. When Arthur finally reached the safety of his home, he locked the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing heavily. His heart was racing, not just from the physical exertion but from the weight of what he had discovered. Sitting at his kitchen table, he spread out the journal and began reading it more thoroughly. Each page revealed new layers of intrigue, painting a picture of a town built on lies and greed. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally caught up with him. Arthur collapsed onto his couch, the journal resting beside him. Sleep eluded him, however, as his mind raced with possibilities. Should he share this with others? Would anyone believe him? And what about the warning? Were there really people watching? Despite his fatigue, Arthur knew one thing for certain. His life, and the lives of everyone in Willow Creek, was about to change forever. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Arthur Langley's small house, casting golden streaks across the cluttered living room. Despite the warmth of daylight, Arthur felt anything but calm. The journal he had unearthed from Eleanor Whitmore's grave lay open on his kitchen table, its pages whispering secrets that had been buried for a century. He couldn't stop reading, not because he wanted to, but because he felt compelled. Each word pulled him deeper into a web of intrigue and danger, one that seemed impossible to escape. Eleanor's writing was both beautiful and haunting. Her penmanship flowed like poetry, yet her words carried the weight of someone who knew they were running out of time. As Arthur flipped through the entries, patterns began to emerge. Names repeated themselves, dates aligned with significant events in Willow Creek's history, and sinister connections came into focus. It wasn't just about one person or one family. It was about an entire system of control that had operated in secret for over 100 years. One passage particularly stood out to Arthur. In it, Eleanor described how certain families used their wealth and influence to manipulate land deals, forcing poorer residents off their property under false pretenses. She named names, powerful ones that made Arthur's stomach churn. Some of these surnames were still prominent in Willow Creek today. The Hargroves, the Callahans, the Greaves. These weren't just old stories, they were threads woven into the fabric of the town itself. But what chilled Arthur most was how Eleanor detailed the lengths these families would go to protect their secrets. She wrote about neighbors turning against each other, businesses mysteriously burning down, and outspoken individuals disappearing without a trace. They fear exposure, she wrote in one entry, and they will destroy anyone who threatens it. Arthur paused, staring at those words as if they might leap off the page and strike him. Was he putting himself in danger by reading this? By knowing too much? As the hours passed, Arthur grew more engrossed in the journal. He scribbled notes furiously in the margins, connecting dots between Eleanor's accounts and modern-day occurrences. In Willow Creek, for instance, there was the strange incident last year when Mr. Peterson, a local farmer, tried to sell his land to outsiders. Within days, inspectors arrived claiming his property violated zoning laws, forcing him to abandon the sale. Or the time Mrs. Bennett, a retired teacher, publicly criticized the town council during a meeting, and then suddenly moved away weeks later, citing personal reasons. These incidents had always puzzled Arthur, but now they fit together, like pieces of a puzzle. The same families Eleanor accused of corruption a century ago were still pulling strings behind the scenes. They had adapted to the times, hiding their actions behind legal jargon and bureaucratic red tape, but their methods remained unchanged. Power, greed, and control, it was all there, written plainly in Eleanor's desperate scrawl. By late afternoon, Arthur realized he couldn't keep this discovery to himself any longer. This wasn't just his story to tell. It belonged to the people of Willow Creek. But how could he share it without causing panic, or worse, retaliation? He thought about going straight to the authorities, but doubt crept in. Who could he trust? The police chief, Sheriff Monroe, was married to a Hargrove. The mayor's office had ties to the Callahans. Even the newspaper editor owed favors to the Greaves family. If these powerful clans truly held sway over the town, approaching them directly would be suicide. Instead, Arthur decided to confide in a few close friends first, people he trusted implicitly. That evening, he invited 3 of them over. Maggie, a retired librarian with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. Tom, a mechanic who had lived in Willow Creek his entire life. And Rachel, a young journalist eager to make a name for herself. They gathered around Arthur's kitchen table, coffee mugs steaming in hand as he laid out the journal and began explaining what he had found. At first, they listened skeptically. Maggie raised an eyebrow, questioning whether the journal was authentic. Tom scratched his head, wondering aloud why anyone would bury such a thing in the first place. But as Arthur read aloud from Eleanor's entries, their skepticism turned to shock, and then anger. Rachel's eyes widened as she jotted down notes, already envisioning headlines. Maggie muttered curses under her breath, while Tom clenched, his fists muttering about dirty politics. "This changes everything," Rachel said finally, breaking the tense silence. "If this is true, and I believe it is, we're sitting on a bombshell. People need to know about this." Arthur nodded grimly. "That's exactly what worries me. If we expose this, we'll be stepping on some very powerful toes. These families don't play fair." Maggie leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "Then we have to be smarter than them. We can't just blurt this out willy-nilly. We need proof, solid evidence that backs up every claim in this journal. Otherwise, they'll tear us apart before we even get started." Tom agreed, adding, "And we'll need allies. Not everyone in this town is blind to what's going on. There are good people here who've been pushed around long enough. If we present this right, we might actually stand a chance." For the first time since finding the journal, Arthur felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he didn't have to face this alone. Together they devised a plan. Rachel would dig deeper into public records, looking for corroborating evidence to support Eleanor's claims. Maggie would use her connections at the library to research historical documents that might shed further light on the families mentioned in the journal. Meanwhile, Tom offered to discreetly sound out trusted townsfolk, gauging their willingness to join the fight. As the night wore on, the group worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and determination. But despite their newfound resolve, unease lingered in the air. Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even inside his own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the overhead light sent a jolt of paranoia through him. Had someone followed him home from Dead Man's Hill? Were the shadows outside his window merely trees or something more sinister? Before his friends left, Arthur locked the journal in a hidden safe beneath his floorboards. Just in case, he explained, though no one needed convincing. They all understood the risks involved. As they parted ways, promising to meet again soon, Arthur stood in his doorway watching them disappear into the darkness. For the first time in years, he felt connected to something bigger than himself, but also more vulnerable than ever. Back inside, he double-checked the locks on his doors and windows, then settled onto the couch with a heavy sigh. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. His mind raced with possibilities, fears, and questions. What if they failed? What if exposing the truth only made things worse? And what about Eleanor's ominous warning? "They are still watching." Those words echoed in his head like a ghostly whisper refusing to fade. Yet amidst the uncertainty, one thing was clear. Arthur had crossed a line. There was no going back now. Whatever happened next, the fate of Willow Creek, and perhaps his own life, rested in his hands. By the time dawn broke over Willow Creek, the secret Arthur Langley had unearthed was no longer confined to his small house. The four friends, Arthur, Maggie, Tom, and Rachel, had worked late into the night, piecing together Eleanor Whitmore's journal with fragments of history they could verify. But secrets have a way of escaping even the most careful hands. By morning, whispers of Arthur's discovery had begun to ripple through the town like wind through tall grass. It started innocently enough. Rachel, eager and perhaps a little too excited, mentioned the journal to her coworker at the local diner where she sometimes freelanced as a waitress. "You won't believe what I heard last night," she said in a hushed tone while refilling coffee cups. "Arthur found something big, something that ties back to those old families who run this town." Her coworker's eyes widened, and by lunchtime half the diner seemed to know about it. From there, the story spread like wildfire. People talked as they lined up for groceries at the market, as they waited for their kids outside the school, and as they sipped beer at the corner pub. At first, it was just idle gossip. "Did you hear? Arthur dug up a grave." Then came speculation. What if he found treasure? And finally, fear. Do you think it's cursed? By noon, the entire town was buzzing. Conversations turned heated, opinions clashed, and paranoia set in. Some dismissed the rumors as nonsense, rolling their eyes at yet another attempt to stir drama in sleepy Willow Creek. Others grew uneasy, recalling the old legends surrounding Dead Man's Hill and the whispered warnings about disturbing its graves. Still others began to wonder if there might be truth to Arthur's claims, if maybe, just maybe, the powerful families who controlled the town weren't as benevolent as they appeared. The tension reached a boiling point when someone claimed to have seen strange men lurking near Deadman's Hill late at night. A group of teenagers, daring each other to visit the cemetery after dark, swore they spotted two figures in tailored suits standing silently among the tombstones. Their flashlights had caught glints of metal, perhaps badges or cufflinks, and then the men vanished without a trace. Whether this sighting was real or exaggerated didn't matter. It fueled the growing unease sweeping through the town. At the heart of all this was Arthur himself, who quickly became both celebrated and vilified. To some, he was a hero, a brave soul willing to uncover the truth no matter the cost. To others, he was reckless, stirring up trouble where none existed. By mid-afternoon, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors called to ask questions. Reporters from neighboring towns requested interviews, and strangers knocked on his door hoping for a glimpse of the infamous journal. Arthur barely had time to eat or sleep, let alone process the chaos unfolding around him. Maggie, Tom, and Rachel tried to help manage the situation, but even they were overwhelmed. Maggie spent hours fielding calls from curious townsfolk, trying to downplay the rumors while subtly encouraging people to stay vigilant. Tom took to patrolling the streets near Arthur's house, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious. And Rachel, ever the ambitious journalist, struggled to balance her desire to break the story with her loyalty to Arthur and the group. She knew publishing anything prematurely could put them all in danger, but she also understood the power of public pressure. Meanwhile, the divide in Willow Creek deepened. On one side were those who supported Arthur, believing the town deserved to know its true history. These individuals saw Eleanor's journal as proof that generations of corruption needed to be exposed. They argued passionately at town meetings, demanding transparency and accountability. Many of them were ordinary folks, farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, who had long suspected something wasn't right but never had evidence to back it up. On the other side were those loyal to the powerful families, the Hargroves, the Callahans, the Greaves. This faction dismissed Arthur's findings as fabrications designed to create unrest. They accused him of tampering with historical records and warned that digging up graves was disrespectful to the dead. Some even suggested he was mentally unstable, pointing to his eccentric behavior and obsession with the past. Flyers began appearing around town overnight, plastered on lampposts and bulletin boards, accusing Arthur of spreading lies and urging residents to ignore his baseless claims. As tensions escalated, so did the strange occurrences plaguing Willow Creek. Livestock went missing from farms, leaving behind only scattered feathers and bloodstains. Crops failed inexplicably, wilting despite regular watering and care. Eerie, symbols carved into trees appeared along the edges of Deadman's Hill, their meanings unknown but undeniably ominous. Some swore they heard faint chanting coming from the forest at night, though no source could be found. Each new incident added fuel to the fire, making it harder for anyone to remain neutral. Arthur tried to keep his head down, focusing on gathering more evidence to support Eleanor's claims. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. Everywhere he went, people stared, whispered, or outright confronted him. One afternoon, as he walked to the library to meet Maggie, a man stepped out of the shadows and blocked his path. He wore a suit and tie, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Langley," the man said smoothly, "you've stirred quite the hornet's nest. Perhaps it's time to reconsider your pursuits." Arthur froze, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" he demanded, though he already suspected the answer. The man smiled thinly. "Just someone looking out for the town's best interests. You should think carefully about what you're doing. Not everyone appreciates having skeletons dragged out of closets." With that, the man turned and walked away, leaving Arthur shaken. When he arrived at the library, Maggie immediately noticed his pale face and trembling hands. After hearing what happened, she insisted they step up their precautions. From that day forward, Arthur stopped going out alone, and the group began meeting only in secluded locations. Despite the mounting pressure, Arthur refused to back down. He couldn't, not when the stakes were so high. Every page of Eleanor's journal reinforced his conviction that the truth needed to come out. But as the days passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Whoever these watchers were, they weren't going to sit idly by while their secrets were exposed. One evening, as Arthur sat at his kitchen table, poring over the journal once again, he realized something chilling. Eleanor hadn't just documented the corruption. She had predicted exactly how it would play out. Her final entries described how those in power would attempt to silence anyone who threatened them, and how easily fear could turn neighbors against each other. Reading those words, Arthur felt a cold certainty settle over him. The battle for Willow Creek's soul had only just begun, and it would test every ounce of courage and resolve he possessed. The weight of Eleanor Whitmore's journal pressed heavily on Arthur Langley's mind as he sat alone in his dimly lit study. The room was cluttered with maps, documents, and photographs spread across every available surface, each piece a fragment of Willow Creek's hidden history. But none of it compared to the explosive revelations contained within the leather-bound pages. Every entry painted a clearer picture of corruption, manipulation, and betrayal, crimes that had festered beneath the town's surface for over a century, and now Arthur knew they were crimes that needed to be exposed. As he flipped through the journal again, one name stood out repeatedly: Greaves. The Greaves family wasn't just mentioned casually. They were at the center of nearly every scheme, Eleanor described. From land grabs to political maneuvering, their influence seemed to extend into every corner of Willow Creek's past and present. Arthur recognized the name instantly. Even today, the Greaves family owned most of the prime real estate in town, including the lumber mill that employed half its residents. Their wealth and power were undeniable, but what shocked Arthur most was how deeply entrenched they remained in local politics and business dealings. It was as if time itself had conspired to keep them untouchable. But the journal didn't stop there. Eleanor also named other families, the Hargroves and Callahans, who worked alongside the Greaves clan to maintain control. Together they formed an unspoken alliance, passing down their secrets and strategies from generation to generation. According to Eleanor, these families operated like a shadow government, pulling strings behind closed doors while presenting a facade of respectability to the public. They funded campaigns, silenced critics, and ensured loyalty through favors, or threats. Reading her words, Arthur couldn't help but wonder how many lives had been ruined, how many dreams crushed under the weight of their greed. Yet, As compelling as the evidence was, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that something, even darker, lurked beneath the surface. In one particularly chilling passage, Eleanor wrote about the Pact, a mysterious agreement made between the founding families of Willow Creek. She hinted that this pact involved more than just money or power. It tied their fates together in ways she dared not fully explain. "Blood binds them," she wrote cryptically, "and blood will protect them." Arthur stared at those words for a long time, his stomach churning. What did she mean by blood? Was it literal, symbolic, or something else entirely? His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Arthur froze, his heart skipping a beat. Visitors were rare these days, especially after dark. Slowly, he rose from his chair and peered through the peephole. Standing on his porch were two men dressed in immaculate suits, their expressions calm but unreadable. One of them held a briefcase, while the other carried an envelope bearing the seal of the Willow Creek Historical Preservation Society. Arthur hesitated before opening the door. He already knew who or what they represented. These weren't ordinary visitors. They were emissaries sent to deliver a message. Still, he forced himself to remain composed as he greeted them. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. The taller of the two men stepped forward, offering a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Langley, we understand you've recently come into possession of certain artifacts related to our town's history. We'd like to discuss their proper handling." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Artifacts? You mean Eleanor Whitmore's journal?" The man nodded slightly, though his demeanor remained unchanged. "Indeed. Such items are invaluable pieces of our shared heritage and should be preserved appropriately. Our organization exists to ensure historical materials are treated with care and respect." Arthur crossed his arms, his suspicion growing. "And by preserved, you mean taken away and locked up where no one can see them, right?" The second man interjected smoothly, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Mr. Langley. We're simply here to offer guidance. However, we must stress the importance of discretion when dealing with sensitive materials. Not everything from the past is meant for public consumption." It was clear they weren't asking nicely. They were issuing a thinly veiled threat. Arthur felt anger bubbling beneath the surface, but he kept his emotions in check. "I appreciate your concern," he said evenly, "but I believe the people of Willow Creek deserve to know the truth about their history. Keeping secrets only benefits those who want to maintain control." For a moment, neither man responded. Then the taller one tilted his head slightly, his smile faltering just enough to reveal a hint of irritation. "Be careful, Mr. Langley. Some truths are better left buried, for everyone's sake." With that, he handed Arthur the envelope and turned to leave, his companion following close behind. Once they were gone, Arthur locked the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. Opening the envelope, he found a single sheet of paper inside. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. A list of names, dates, and events, all corroborating details from Eleanor's journal. Beneath the list was a handwritten note. "If you proceed, do so wisely. Eyes are everywhere." Arthur sank onto the couch, staring at the paper in stunned silence. Whoever these men were, they weren't bluffing. They knew exactly what he had uncovered, and they were watching him closely. For the first time since finding the journal, doubt crept into his mind. Had he underestimated the danger? Could he really take on an entire network of powerful families without putting himself and those he cared about in harm's way? Late that night, unable to sleep, Arthur sat by candlelight, poring over the journal once more. Each word felt heavier now, laden with implications he hadn't fully grasped before. He thought about Eleanor, writing frantically in the dead of night, knowing her life was at risk. How terrified she must have been, and yet, how determined. She hadn't given up even when faced with unimaginable odds, and neither could he. By morning, Arthur had made up his mind. If the powerful families wanted to intimidate him into silence, they had underestimated him. He would expose their secrets, not recklessly, but strategically. He called Maggie, Tom, and Rachel arranging an emergency meeting at a secluded cabin on the outskirts of town. There, surrounded by towering trees and far from prying eyes, they devised a new plan. Rachel suggested publishing excerpts from the journal online, using anonymous accounts to avoid immediate retaliation. "We can leak small pieces at a time," she explained. "That way, the story builds momentum gradually and they won't know where it's coming from." Maggie agreed, adding, "But we need to gather more proof first. Documents, photographs, anything that backs up Eleanor's claims. Without hard evidence, they'll dismiss it as fiction." Tom nodded grimly. "And we'll need allies. People brave enough to speak out publicly. Folks who've been pushed around by these families for years. Once they realize they're not alone, they might finally stand up." Arthur listened intently, grateful for their support. Together, they outlined steps to strengthen their case. Maggie would dig deeper into archival records, searching for any mention of the pact Eleanor referenced. Rachel would discreetly reach out to potential whistleblowers, encouraging them to share their stories. And Tom volunteered to rally trusted friends, building a coalition of ordinary citizens willing to fight back. As the meeting drew to a close, Arthur looked around at his companions, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They were outnumbered and outmatched, yes, but they weren't powerless. With enough determination and careful planning, they might just uncover the truth and bring justice to Willow Creek. But as they parted ways, heading back toward town under the cover of dusk, Arthur couldn't ignore the nagging sensation that danger was closing in. The shadows seemed longer tonight, the air heavier. Somewhere out there, unseen eyes watched and waited. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The battle for Willow Creek's soul was far from over, and Arthur Langley was standing squarely in the crosshairs.